to be objective, because the moment you love yourself more than your neighbor, you're being subjective. And if you love your neighbor more than yourself, you're being subjective for him. And subjectivity interferes with clarity. And we need to know that at the time of Kabbalah's Torah, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu is actually giving the Torah to the Jewish people, there's no broken telephone over here. Nobody is, oh yeah, that's what he said? Well, I heard the following thing, and I heard the following thing. You know, I went to, after leaving a shir that I gave over, I walked behind people. They didn't realize it was behind them, and they're talking about what I said. I could not believe what they heard. People interpret things through their own subjectivity, their own subjective way of looking at reality. But at Har Sinai, everybody was equal in everybody's eyes. To tell you, they got to this level of objectivity, of love your neighbors yourself. And that's why it's Klal Gadol b'Torah, because the entire Torah is based upon that level of objectivity. You can't have Kabbalah's Torah. And that's really what the Leiv Tov is all about. To get a Leiv Tov, the point of Sfiras HaOmer is to get to a point where you have a Leiv Tov, because a Leiv Tov means you can be objective. You're not going to be affected and bothered by things that are petty and mundane. You're not going to be pulled down. No sinas chinam, no wasteful hatred, no wanton hatred, no kin, no jealousy. All those negative traits, they're all gone because you rise above them because of a Leiv Tov. That's the way it works. Now, what's interesting is you can develop a Leiv. Everybody has to have a Leiv. And that happens the moment you leave Mitzrayim. You leave Mitzrayim, you get your heart back. And you build the Leiv for 32 days. But the Tov, that's a much more different reality. That's a whole different challenge altogether. I get a Tov, I get a good heart, mediocre heart, medium heart, cold heart. These are all natural things. But a Leiv Tov, a good heart, the good part, you have to first go through Lag BaOmer. What's Lag BaOmer? Lag BaOmer is the day that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one of the premier students of Rabbi Akiva, who said Klal Gadol b'Torah, revealed the Zohar. It wasn't written down officially so much later on. It wasn't published so much later, in the 1200s, right? But Moshe de Leon, but it was revealed to special Talmidim, who then gave it over to their Talmidim, and we have the Zohar today because of that, and then eventually the Kisei Arizal based upon the Zohar, and so forth. The repository of Kabbalistic thought. But a person to think to themselves, this is Kabbalah, they make barbecues, bonfires, the collection of wood out there is monstrous. I have no idea. One of the biggest miracles of creation, the eighth wonder of creation, is how every year they can burn so much wood, and by the following Lag BaOmer, they have more. They find just as much, if not more, in the year. It's a big thing because of the light that was revealed on the Yurtzeit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who died that day. He went up to Shemayim as he revealed the Zohar. There's all kinds of stories in the Zohar itself, what took place that day, Kabbalistically, phenomenal event in the history of mankind. Not appreciated by everybody today because of we don't learn the same way. But that's what took place. Also, on Lag BaOmer, far in advance of the Gilui of the Zohar, of the revelation of the Zohar, the man in the Midbar began to fall on that day. Right? They had matzah for a month. Lasted for a month after they left Mitzrayim, which is basically a Pesach Sheni coming up this week, and the Omer, the Omer of Man began to fall on the 33rd day of the Omer itself, and this we discussed back in Parashas Beshalach, the whole concept of the Man, what the Man represents, but they all come down to one basic idea: the Omer, the Leiv Tov, and the Kohanim as well, because the Kohanim were different and they were unique from the rest of the Jewish people. They were not involved in everyday matters. They didn't plant things, they didn't grow things, they didn't cut them down, they didn't harvest, they didn't work in the business world, they weren't making money. They were totally supported by the rest of the nation. This is the Trumas and Maasros, and the Avodas Hashem. That was their whole reality. The Kohen Gadol, even more so, who never left the Beis Hamikdash at all. His entire 10 years, Kohen Gadol until his death. Never left the Beis Hamikdash. Too holy to leave the Beis Hamikdash. Because his reality was the big picture. His reality was outside the everyday mundane world that we live in and we're a part of. He had automatically a Leiv Tov. That's why the Kohen Gadol, the most famous Kohen Gadol, Aaron HaKohen, the high priest in Moshe's time, what was he doing all the time? He was Rod the Shalit. He was going from place to place to place, making peace. Like the Kohen Gadol had nothing better to do than to make peace between husband and wife and friend and friend. What was he doing over here? I mean, there were marriage counselors at that time. There were therapists to go to. The Kohen Gadol himself had to be involved in such a mundane, petty thing. No, wasn't mundane, wasn't petty, because Shalom, Shleimus. We can go all over it with this 25 times that Shalom is mentioned in the entire Torah, because it alludes to the 25 of the Or HaGanuz, the hidden light of creation. These are all different shiurim. But the main point over here is that what Lag BaOmer represents, the Kabbalah, it's tactical, it goes in tremendous detail, it really deals with everything up until creation, until Ma'aseh Bereshis. A wonderful world, beyond imagination. You cannot believe and begin to understand and imagine what was revealed that day, and from that point on, in terms of understanding the will of God in the process of making creation. It's absolutely phenomenal. But the main thing it does, it lifts you out of everyday reality. It is the big picture. Pardes, Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod. Pshat, simple understanding, everyday life, like outside the Mishkan, right? Outside the tent, the curtain of the Mishkan, everyday life. People doing what they have to survive. Then you have Remez, hinting to a higher level of reality of Pardes, right? And that is like inside the Chatzar, where the Mizbech, where the altar was, where they sacrificed the animals. Miracles took place, but not like the miracles taking place inside the Mishkan itself. Then you get to the Heichel, the sanctuary of the Mishkan. You have to see the picture to see how this works out. And that corresponds to the Drush, which means investigation, the level of the Talmud. You're going deeper to understand, what's it talking about? What's the essence of this concept? And finally, the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Holy of Holies, where the presence of God literally dwelled inside. And the Arna Kodesh, and the Luchas, everything was inside there. As the Gemara points out, that the Arna Kodesh itself, Arna Bris, took up more space than was physically allotted to it, because it was Lamalam in a Teva. What does it mean to be Lamalam in a Teva? That's the big picture. That is the big picture itself. Because the Jewish people were created to live with the big picture, to be real with the big picture. That's our reality. As the lesson points out, everything about the Jewish people from their conception until present day has always been supernatural. Because that's the reality of the big picture. That was the life of the Kohanim. They lived Lamalam Teva on everyday life. Right? That was their reality every day. They were the big picture. They represented the big picture. They shared the big picture. That's what Arnica was doing when he was making peace. He was sharing the big picture with others, and when they bought into it, they were able to have a Lev Tov. With a Lev Tov, they were able to make peace between themselves and with the Kodesh Baruch Hu ultimately. That's the role of the Kohen Gadol. This is why Kalwin is Chof Hey, again the 25 of the Or HaGanuz and the Nun of the Nun Shari Bina, built right into his name itself. And this is really what Lag BaOmer comes to do. Whether a person is zeichet to learn Kabbalah even a little bit on whatever level, the main point of Lag BaOmer is rise above the everyday reality. Don't be petty. Don't be mundane. Don't be drawn down. Don't get absorbed in things that don't make a difference to you. Don't care too much about things you shouldn't care about. It'll destroy you. It'll ruin you, and it will ruin your relationships, and it will destroy your potential, and you'll have no energy to do what you have to do. You'll find it for gashmis, but not for ruchnis. When you have the big picture, when you rise above everyday life, everyday reality, which you can only do through the depth of Torah. That's what Torah, 4 levels of Torah, 70 facets, 70 faces of Torah, 50 gates of understanding. Each one, each madrega, each level you go up is a greater exposure to the bigger picture, like going to an airplane, rising up and looking down at the world below you. It gets bigger. It gets actually smaller and smaller and smaller. Your picture gets bigger. You can see more. And you have more perspective. Perspective. That's the key. That's the big picture. That's what Parashas Emor is all about, which is also why the Chagim come at the end of the Parsha too. That's what the Kohanim are about. That's what the Chagim are about. That's what Lag BaOmer is about. That's what Torah is about. And that's what the Jewish people are supposed to be about.